What's up, everybody? Again, this is Chris with the Discipling Culture of New City Church. Just want to kind of walk you through how you know whether or not you're leading a small group or whether you're actually leading a discipling group. All right, now hear my heart. All right, I am for small groups. All right, I am for them. In fact, I am maybe one of the biggest proponents for small groups, as long as small groups are discipling. Okay. And so I want to kind of show you or kind of help you to say, how do I know whether I'm leading a discipling group or whether I'm leading a small group, okay? And so we're just going to walk through a couple things real fast here. So the first thing about leading a discipling group is discipling groups are intentional about disciple making, meaning that the reason that you've brought these people in is that you're going to invest in them in such a way that they will go and make more disciples, okay? That's the commitment part of this, right? The small groups are more into discipling happens, but it's maybe unintentional. All right, and so for me, I was part of a tremendous amount of small groups, cell groups, connect groups, whatever you want to call them. And while I did grow up in them, no one taught me how to multiply my life. Nobody made me come into the submission that Jesus was Lord or any of these things. And so if those things aren't happening, you very well can be leading a connect group, meaning that the connect group goes and then it ends and then nothing else happens out of that. All right? Another thing to help you decide whether or not you're leading a small group or a discipling group is that small groups are curriculum led, meaning that somebody said, hey, here's what we're going to teach and this is how we're going to teach it and this is what we're going to do. All right? Discipling groups are always Spirit-led. They're always Spirit-led. They live on prayer and fasting by the spiritual parent, meaning that as the group goes on, they all need something different. And without you knowing what they need, you can't give them and help them grow up what they need. And so your role is to know what they need, where they're at in their spiritual journey, and how to grow them up. This only comes by prayer, fasting, and knowing how they speak. All right? Another way you know whether or not you're leading a small group versus a discipling group, small groups are open to everyone. All right? And by so doing, you lower the group to the lowest common denominator, meaning the guy who's just there for relationships. He has no concern whatsoever for Jesus becoming Lord of his life. He's just there to make friends. He's just lonely, and so he wants to come in and be part of the group, but he is not submitting his life to Christ, nor does he want to, all right? A discipling group, you handpick them, all right? Just like Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2, you invest in reliable men and women who will, again, invest in reliable men and women. So when we say small groups are for the lowest common denominator, discipling groups are for reliable men and women who will invest in reliable men and women. All right, does that make sense? All right. Another way that you know that you're working between a small group and a discipling group. In a small group or a connect group, when it's lower to the lowest common denominator, anything can be Lord. All right? Meaning that somebody can come in and say, I hate my husband. I just hate him, and I'm fixing to walk out the door on him. And everybody's sitting there going, well, I can't give advice, and I don't really know what to say to this, and I don't know how to approach this except for saying, I'll pray for you. Right? Discipling groups don't work that way. Discipling groups are like, hey, you know what? Jesus is Lord, and we submit to that lordship. And unless your husband has had an affair on you, right, then our role is to encourage you on how to walk this thing out. Separation, maybe, but divorce, no, unless there's been an affair, because that's not how Jesus wrote this thing to be. And so we submit that marriage to Jesus as Lord, meaning that there is a high challenge that goes along with discipling groups, okay? Another way that you know whether you're leading a small group versus a discipling group, like all the small groups that I ever led, I was always told to pick one person and spend more of my time with that one person so that they would replicate the group. So I would invest in this one person a little bit more than the rest, and that one person would replicate. All right? I'm not saying anything is wrong with that, but I am saying this. If you choose the wrong person and that person doesn't replicate, or if you choose an apostle who's not wired to walk with people, then you may have spent a lot of your time investing in somebody who's not going to go, right? In discipling groups, it is part of the DNA that you're being invested in because we've seen you as a reliable person, and your role now is to invest in someone else who's a reliable person. That's how it works. Discipleship groups don't work on replication. They work off multiplication, meaning that if I invest in 6, that Lord willing, that at least 4 of them will take off and disciple more. And so instead of it being me taking one guy and investing 6 months of my life to whether he may or may not go, I take my life and invest in 6 or 7 or 4 or 5 of them take off and my life multiplies instead of replicates. Does that make sense? Okay. So another way that you know you're leading a discipleship group versus a connect group, all right, is that in a connect group, and I'll just give you an example of how this worked at New City Church, is that we would take people in and we would train them for 6 weeks to lead a group, all right? And so in the training of those people, that they would come and they would hear and they would listen, but there was never a moment where they were like, hey, is Jesus Lord of this person, or can they just facilitate a group? And so what you wound up with is, like, out of the 25 connect groups that we had here at the church, we had a lot of groups where the blind was leading the blind. Like people who had not submitted their life to Jesus as Lord or very new in their walk were leading other people. And so we had the blind leading the blind, and we were like, this thing is going to end in tragedy for us. Discipling groups, there's a spiritual parent in the room, just like in your house. Like there's a mom and dad there to make sure kids aren't putting stuff in their mouth, that they're not burning themselves, that they're not getting hurt, that they're not hurting each other. There's a spiritual parent in the room who is responsible for that entire crew. All right? In connect groups, without that, you can very well just have the blind leading the blind where everybody goes nuts. All right? We've watched that happen. Another way that you know whether or not you're leading a discipling group versus a connect group, and this is how. Like, connect groups are built, small groups in these areas are built to facilitate relationships, all right? There's a book called Sticky Church, which is written about small groups, meaning that everybody gets to come, everybody gets to hang out, because it's relationally how you keep people at your church. But here's the problem with that. Like, that doesn't facilitate a movement. It makes everybody happy, makes everybody cozy, but it doesn't facilitate a movement of Jesus being Lord because of the environment that it fosters. And so the difference between those two is this. The discipling group is made to facilitate or usher in a movement, because the discipling group is meant to multiply their life, to continue to make spiritual parents, to make leaders that will multiply out. All right, does that make sense? And so let's just keep moving on. The next one of how you know whether or not you've got a connect group or whether you've got a discipling group, and this may be mainly the hardest one, the hardest bridge to overcome, is that connect groups are always a weekly meet. Like they're weekly meet. You do them, you have them, they go from 6 to 8:30 at your house, everybody has a good time. Nobody thinks about them again until the following week. Right? Until it's time to clean the house, until it's time to get the food ready, till it's time. Nobody thinks about it again. Discipling is like think about what Jesus did, man. It was more life on life. Like, it wasn't like, let's meet together and not think about them again for the next 7 days. It was, my role is to invest in them. And if all I can give them is a couple hours a week, then that's all I can give them. But I would challenge you in this is like, man, the more you give them, the more they're going to turn around and give somebody else. And so it's a constant push on how much can I give them? How much time can I give them? How much can I invest in them? Because what you do for them is what they will do for the next crew. All right? If you give them a weekly meet, that's what they're going to turn around and give the next crew. All right? So discipleship, as much as you know how, that's what we say, as much as you know how, not a weekly meet. All right? The next part of leading a discipleship group versus a connect group is this, like in discipling. Discipling works off what we call high invite, high challenge, meaning that you are handpicked. Like you're handpicked. Like we pray about it. The Lord puts a green light over your head. We handpick you to be part of this group. The result of that is that we have high expectations of you. Like the high challenge parts means that you're going to submit your life to Jesus being Lord. Like that's how it works. In a connect group, man, it's high invite, meaning that, hey, we really want you to come be a part of our group, but it's very low challenge, meaning that we don't want to push on you too hard because we want to make sure we maintain the relationship, right? It creates this cozy culture, which is fine, but man, nothing really changes in a cozy culture, right? It's just a place to vent, just to let stuff out. I mean, you keep it cozy. In discipling, man, discipling's a painful road sometimes between high invite, high challenge, meaning that sometimes you got to learn how to push really hard. Sometimes you got to know how to bring them along with you, right? And so that is a challenge. Like that is a dance between those two things of being able to push and being able to come back and hang out, all right? Like we see this with Jesus. We see Jesus call Peter Satan at one point, but we also see Jesus, man, walking very tightly with this guy as well to where he could get away with that. All right? And discipling works the same way. You don't get the right to call people Satan or to tell them they're wrong if you don't love them, like if you are not fighting for them, right? And you can't fight for them. You're fooling yourself if you think you're fighting for them when you don't really love them, right? And the only way you're going to love them is to invest time in them, all right? So that's a discipling group versus a small group, where a small group is like, it doesn't really matter if you love them or not, right? We're gonna do this thing for an hour and a half for the next 12 weeks, and then we're going to split up and I'm going to move on to the next crew. And so, man, that's kind of the difference. That's how you know. So these are just 6 or 7 ways that you're going to know whether or not you're facilitating a small group or whether you're facilitating a movement, right? And our heart for you is to always be facilitating a movement, that give your life to something that matters, all right? Not just relationships. You'll get the relationships in discipling because they will be much deeper because you've walked through hard things, all right? Don't settle for less. Don't let good be the enemy of great. All right? Man, I hope you found this helpful. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us or holler at your spiritual parent. Thanks, guys.